Hello, my name is Dmitry Shitov. I represent GitHub company. We are engaged in 1C performance improvement, and it's not important for us whether this database is on Windows or Linux. If you don't know what operational system to use for 1C operation, maybe you will be interested in my presentation and in my experience, and you will be able to take a better decision. A year ago, Dmitry Shitov has already presented this information. He was telling about our plans regarding the use of Postgres for 1C. We started using Postgres and Windows, leaving the environment that is typical for 1C. Over the last year, one of our key online services on term queries analysis moved. We have thousands of gigabytes of logs as plant queries and text queries. In our work, we often use this service. That's why for us, this is a critical application that should not stop. In my presentation, I'm not going to tell you about information that can be found in available sources. I'm going to tell you about something that you cannot find in textbooks. Besides, when we speak about selecting an application, well, you cannot find this information in some textbook. I'm going to tell you why we need Postgres when MS SQL is commonly used. Of course, I'm speaking about 1C databases. Today, most installations for 1C are used for MS SQL. Over the last year, we have received a lot of requests where people asked us to solve the problem on the stage of migration 1C to Postgres, or on the primary stage of operation after this migration was conducted. I can recommend you the following. If an application was created on DBMS Postgres from scratch, then there should be no problem with the project start. But the majority of typical 1C solutions and enfranchised developments do not suit this condition, and the bases themselves were not created for Postgres. They were developed for MS SQL. 1C does not specify that any DBMS is preferable when describing its typical solutions. I think that ERP base will not work in a similar way on all DBMS, because typical universal code does not take into account special features of every DBMS. I can give you the following example. Last year, a client addressed us. Over half a year, he experienced problems with long 1C operation. This client had to register invoice, and this operation took half an hour up to 2 hours. Several parameters of the scheduler were wrong, and that's why people had to experience these difficulties for half a year. We managed to improve the parameters, and that's why performance grew, and people did not even believe that it was possible in the beginning. So this operation speeded up by more than 1,000 of times. In this context, it's clear that typical configurations do not account for special features of every database management system. So universal code cannot take into account the special features of hardware. Those who migrate to MS SQL should know that MS SQL Server can change its internal settings without participation of people. And maybe you will not have to change Postgres settings every time, but you should know whom you can address in case you realize that these settings should be changed. Speaking about this story with the client, next day the administrator called me, and after that she said that she did not even know what to do because the work that was conducted during one day was finished within half an hour. We cannot say that now we transfer 1C to Postgres without taking into account special details such as configuration, platform, release, DBMS, and the time that passed after these releases. This time shows us indirectly that the situation is stable. If your neighbor with a similar box launched it successfully, does not mean that the situation will be similar for you. The example that I gave you, well, in that case, there was no sense in showing you the cost of operation by processing unit, because the speed of operations may be very different. Regarding drives, for example, if they write 100 megabytes per second or gigabytes per second, well, you can change the settings there. During migration, we realized that it's necessary to calculate your budget when migrating to DBMS. You should take into account the features of DBMS that you want to migrate on. In our case, a critical point was that we needed to determine the size of tables and read data from databases different from 1C system. We did it through DBC at COM objects. So our special feature was integration with external data. In order to do it for Linux migration, first of all, we rewrote SQL queries that we used to address MSQL databases. After that, when we transferred to Linux, we had to create web services for external data because external data sources did not allow us to do many things. We created web service on Java, and we were lucky that we had a specialist who managed to do it rather quickly. But I don't know whether you have such a specialist or not. So the conclusion is simple. When migrating from Windows to Linux, it's important who will conduct this migration, whether this person has a similar experience or not. So we had web services on the basis of 1C and Java. So we could return to Windows if necessary. Platform 11 and 12 did not exist then, and we hope that 1C will turn its face to the problem of external data sources. But now we have what we have. Of course, IT specialists think that Postgres is cheaper than MS SQL. But Although this conference is related to Postgres, there is an opinion that the aggregate cost of owning for MS SQL is lower. Actually, business votes by its peers, and the ratio of Postgres and MSQL shows that MSQL is installed more frequently. When planning the budget, technical directors have to include not only money for licenses, but also money for training their employees, for the elimination of problems during the whole cycle of the product support. Quite often we were faced with such a situation when directors thought that if Postgres is free, then Postgres specialists will not require a lot of money and will be key to hire a student. Fortunately, the situation is changing, and people understand that qualification of Postgres database should not be lower than MSQL 2 qualification. Actually, I would like to thank Postgres Pro company that translated documents into Russian, that prepared a training course that is available online. It gives a lot of opportunities for programmers and administrators' education. Do you know how to translate this phrase for 1C? This is remote administration server. It's revenge to those who like GUI. This is the phrase. With Windows you could see a list of working servers, and it was quite easy for you to use your cursor and open them, change some settings, check dynamic settings. But in Linux, 1C implemented it as a command line, so it's not really convenient for users. Having such tools as AVK, set, grad, you can write scripts that will resolve various administration tasks or tasks for clusters management, but it complicates the work of average 1C users who are not ready to work with Linux. And my manager does not like Linux. That's why he uses Windows for 1C operation. He's not here now. That's why I can be frank. I can say that we had to install special servers just to have an opportunity to open configurator with Linux server. And after that, my manager said that Linux is really bad and GUI is bad. But we know that GUI is not Linux strong point. We can use command line here. We can use special servers for Windows, for example. But my manager likes saying that he does not have any time for training because he needs to work. IT managers should understand that there is no sharp transformation here. We should have an intermediary stage. At first, we have to make sure that the structure of data storage and all indices work normally. We need to measure the time of operations before migrations and after the migration, especially for business-critical operations. So you should not refuse such things as ActiveX, COM object, ODBC, external DDL, and external modules of configuration procedure, point-of-sale equipment, client bank. So you should leave all the customer environment of 1C for Windows and shift to Postgres. Besides, the intermediary stage took about a year. It was at the time necessary for us to transfer all our features to Linux. I would like to tell you a few words about harem for Postgres. Well, it's very good if you have a lot of money and one base, but normally you have a lot of bases, you do not have much money, and you have unrealistic requirements from your management. And the result should be provided very urgently. So we have up to several dozens of databases with different nature of load, and in this context we have to isolate this load of the databases. In some cases, it's feasible to divide databases in table spaces, but we decided to arrange specific clusters of PostgreSQL for every job. For example, a critical high-load database was placed on separate drives, archives and analytical bases should be placed on separate drives. Developers with their experiments should also be placed on specific drives. Stream replication can remain on the same server and it is on a separate drive as well. And I'm speaking about physical drives, not about logical drives. I think that even if you don't have money for new drives, still money for cheap drives should be found to exclude some emergent situations. A year ago we told you about the opportunity to store table spaces not only on different drives, but also you can provide special drive for indices and a special drive for temporary tables in 1C and PostgreSQL. It's all very good, but it does not require a lot of administration efforts when you do not have many bases, or when everything is stable and nothing changes for many years, but my management is confused in their requirements, and the requirements to the drives of these bases are different. For example, you should use PCI Express, one of them, and slow drives for others. Besides, quite often my colleagues ask me to deploy a database copy in order not to stop the server. And in this context, I think it's quite logical to divide the bases to separate DBMS clusters. Besides, if there are 1C programmers here, this slide is for you. If you want to use a non-standard port, you should write hostname port equal to and the number of port. So we should not put colon here. Every cluster has its specific drive and its specific port. This division helped us restore backups, so we did not have to account for names spaces. And what is more important, we received an opportunity to determine settings for different productivity of different drives, such as effective, random hedge cost, and provide resources for different jobs on one server. Postgres does not have a mechanism for automatic creation of additional clusters. At least we do not have out-of-box solution. That's why we had to manually copy the files from initd and edited them for every cluster. Even if you look at technical characteristics of hardware, there is a high probability that you can fail to see a feature that is key for you, or it is not specified there. For one of our tasks on this project, high reliability was not necessary, but we needed to have maximum frequency of process. And for this case, E97900X was used. It was to provide 4.5 GHz frequency. But we made a mistake. We bought it, we installed Linux and Postgres, and we did not see this frequency there. We switched on bills, the parameters of power were installed, but it turned out that when these drivers were bought, technologies were present for Windows only. You can enter Intel website and realize whether it works on Linux or not. We realized it only after we bought this equipment. Even microcodes appeared only after 1 quarter. And on the whole, if they say that experience comes with mistakes, well, we can say that we have received experience. In our case, the features of data storage is unlimited length lines. They contain long text. If you want to follow us, you need to consider this information. The size was 500 megabytes, and after migration it was 50,000 megabytes. And we did not make any additional efforts. So basis compressed, we compared the number of lines and the lines themselves. Nothing was eliminated, and that side effect made us read documents. Most 1C databases are not compacted, but in this case, for this specific table accounted for a lot of data, and this information was stored with extended type. And that's why it happened in this case. On the other hand, we realized that we need to analyze tables in terms of the number of lines, and we need to apply compression for specific columns. Another recommendation for you: if you plan to deploy Linux, not for Postgres alone, you may face some unexpected features. If your system administrator used only Windows before that, he should better consult an experienced specialist who can work with Linux. So there is a very old server. We installed Intel 7 and left it for 1 week without load. We were checking the stability of the system, and server restarted itself with kernel panic error. We have analyzed this, and in command stack we noticed a lot of comments with nouveau mark. This is a project for free drivers. It is not an official driver, and these drivers are not stable. We confirmed it. And in the core parameters, we had to write ban for these drivers, and we installed drivers from NVIDIA website. You can read about it in our blog. There is a link here. After that, the system failures stopped, and it looks simple, but if your administrator has not worked with Linux, maybe they won't be able to cope with such a problem. So I would like to summarize what I said. First recommendation, do not conduct fast migration. You should have an intermediary stage when Postgres will be switched to Windows, and you can leave one C server for Windows with the customer environment. Recommendation 2. If you have not conducted similar migrations yourself or do not have much time, then you can face some unexpected problems that will be solved only if you engage experienced people, whether they are your specialists or third-party specialists. Recommendation 3. These migrations should be economically physical. Drivers or components that work for Windows alone can easily make migration non-feasible. Migrating accounting for 3 users is one thing, but migrating ERP for 2,000 users is another thing. The management does not care what is used for the system operation, whether it's Windows or Linux, because it has different goals. It is interested in business goals, for example, in decreasing costs or in stable speed of the system operation. Despite our experience, even we didn't manage to forecast all the problems of this transition. Unexpected problems may occur, and all the accounting department likes reports. Still, we recommend you to have some funds as a security for you. In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is such a difference. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Dmitry. Well, we do not have much time left, but I think we have some questions. My name is Artyom. I have a short question and a comment. Question regarding MS SQL has always own architecture that enables you to use slave. So, you mentioned replication that you have. Do you use it for cold reserve only and for backup removal from the replica or from queries as well? No, for queries we do not use it. But for backup, for code backup, and yes, we do backups from replica, so we monitor its lag for it to be relevant, and we do backups from the replica, and the replica itself is similar to backup. And what about simultaneous replication? Yes. And I have a comment regarding the presentation. The previous speaker, he spoke about 1C yesterday. He was speaking about MS SQL and Postgres battle, and well, unfortunately I was absent. Well, he compares performance and typical operations regarding configuration recovery, for example, and so on. He provided specific figures and time so that we could compare whether Postgres is better or worse when processing various operations. You said that in some points Postgres is better, and I would like to understand specific difference, whether it's 5 times better, 10 times better, and so on. Well, all configurations should be individual, because even typical developments have their own specific features depending on the release. That's why we are to compare some specific application, and we won't be able to answer your question in general. Thank you. We have our last question. Hello, thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask 2 questions. On your slide, I've seen that Java service addressed a Postgres base, some additional base, and 1C base on Postgres. Well, I'm not 1C user, but I'm just wondering whether it's possible to update something in this base if you understand the structure, whether you can write your queries without the use of 1C. So is it critical? Is the structure understandable? Well, it will be difficult for me to answer your question because this service was not created by me, and we have a specialist who can resolve such issues. Well, I mean that the data that are created in Postgres for 1C, are these data understandable for non-1C users? Some entities, tables, and so on. Is this information understandable? Yes, of course. And is it scary or not? Well, normally, as I remember, 1C forbids external influence on 1C basis. And if you want to circumvent this ban, is there any production? Maybe you have heard about it. If you write your processing, for example. Well, I can answer this question later. And I have another question. Popular configurations that several popular configurations, for example, 1C accounting that were transferred to Postgres. Do you have such cases? Okay. As I said, they address us before migration or after migration. And it's not important for us what configurations these are. We do not have any statistics. We just optimize the queries. We select hardware that will cope with the load, and we start operation, so we can optimize it. We look at long queries on MS SQL before migration. After migration, we also monitor long queries and logs, and we resolve these tasks. So we do not say that we transfer accounting only, for example. It's not important for us with what we work. Thank you, Dmitry. I think that you can speak to the presenter in the corridor. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. That's why let's thank our speaker.